Let us be honest about the title of this video for exactly one moment before we begin. Money will flow like crazy. Manifest success and wealth. You have seen those words 1,000 times, attached to 1,000 videos, promising 1,000 versions of the same thing. And you clicked anyway. Maybe because you are curious. Maybe because something in you still hopes that this one will be different. Maybe because the question of your own financial life is real and pressing, and you are still looking for something that actually works. Here is what is going to be different about this one. Carl Jung never promised that money would flow like crazy. He never used the word manifest in the way that word gets used today. He was a Swiss psychiatrist who spent his career in the territory of the human unconscious. And he would have been deeply skeptical of any framework that promised financial abundance through the power of positive thinking. But he did study money. Not in the way an economist studies it, or a financial advisor, or a motivational speaker. He studied it the way he studied everything, as a symptom, as a mirror, as one of the most precise windows available into the deepest and most hidden beliefs a person carries about themselves and about what they deserve to receive from life. And what he found, across decades of clinical work with real people navigating real financial lives, was something that no vision board has ever addressed and no affirmation has ever reached. He found that the ceiling on most people's financial lives is not set by the economy, or by their education, or by their skills, or by the opportunities available to them. It is set by the unconscious, by the beliefs about money, about value, about worthiness, and about what is possible for someone like them, that were installed so early and so deeply that most people have never once examined them directly. And until those beliefs are seen, named, and genuinely worked with, nothing changes. Not sustainably, not at the level that matters. This is Jung's contribution to the conversation about money and success. Not a technique, not a frequency, a map of what is actually happening below the surface and what to do with it. Let us start with the idea that is the foundation of everything else Jung would say about this subject. Money is not just money. This sounds obvious, but the implications of it are radical. Money, in the human psyche, has never been a neutral object. From the moment you first became aware of it as a child, money was loaded. It carried the emotional weight of your family's relationship with it, the anxiety that surrounded certain conversations, the relief or the desperation that came with it, the things that were said out loud, and the things that were not said but understood. The family stories about wealth and poverty, about who had it and who did not, about whether wanting it was greedy or appropriate or realistic for people like your family. All of that absorbed into the psyche long before you were old enough to evaluate it. And it is still there, operating as what Jung called a complex. A complex is a specific term in Jung's psychology, and it is worth understanding clearly because it is the central mechanism in everything we are going to talk about. A complex is a cluster of feelings, beliefs, memories, and expectations that have organized themselves around a central emotional theme in the unconscious. Think of it like an invisible program that runs automatically in the background of your mind, shaping your perceptions and reactions before your conscious mind has a chance to weigh in. Complexes are not conscious beliefs. you can simply decide to change. They are structural. They shape perception automatically, before rational thought has a chance to evaluate what is happening. Everyone has complexes. A mother complex, a father complex, a power complex, a failure complex, and almost everyone, regardless of their background or their current financial situation, has a money complex. A cluster of unconscious material organized around everything money has meant in their particular experience that operates continuously below the surface of their financial decisions. The money complex determines what you notice and what you do not notice. It determines which opportunities your attention is drawn to and which ones you are effectively blind to. It determines how you respond to financial risk, to success, to failure, to negotiation, to the possibility of asking for what you are worth. And it does all of this invisibly, before the conscious mind has said a single word. There is a specific pattern Jung described that almost everyone in financial difficulty recognizes when they hear it described clearly, and that almost nobody connects to its actual source before that moment of recognition. It goes like this: something improves, a raise arrives, or a client pays well, or a period of genuine financial momentum begins. And instead of the feeling of relief and stability that you would expect, a different feeling arrives underneath the good news. A low-grade anxiety, a sense that this is temporary, a vigilance for the thing that is inevitably going to go wrong and restore everything to the familiar level. And sometimes, before anything external goes wrong, an unconscious decision is made that accelerates the return to familiarity, an unnecessary expense, a past opportunity, a conflict that creates distance from the relationship that was driving the good period. Jung would say, that is not self-destruction in the simple sense. That is the money complex doing precisely what it was built to do, which is to maintain the emotional environment that the unconscious has learned to call normal. Normal being, in most cases, whatever was emotionally familiar in the family of origin. Not comfortable, familiar. There is a difference. The unconscious prefers familiar over good. It will sacrifice good for familiar every time, because familiar is what it knows how to navigate. And the unfamiliar, even when it is an improvement, registers as threat. This is why genuine financial change in the Jungian framework is not primarily a financial project. It is a psychological one. The outer circumstances will change when the inner pattern changes. And the inner pattern changes not through discipline or positive thinking, but through the patient, honest, often surprising process of actually seeing what is there. This is why affirmations do not work at the level that matters. Not because the idea of a positive inner relationship with money is wrong, but because affirmations are addressed to the conscious mind. And the conscious mind is not where the money complex lives. The money complex lives in the unconscious, running its program at a level that conscious intention simply cannot reach through repetition alone. What can reach it is the kind of work Jung did with his patients, the careful, honest, often uncomfortable process of bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness, of naming what is actually there rather than what you would prefer to be there. of tracing the belief back to where it was installed and asking, for the first time, as an adult rather than as a child absorbing everything without the capacity to evaluate it, whether this is still the story you want to live by. Now let us talk specifically about what lives in the money complex for most people, because there are two sides to it, and most of the conversation in the self-help world only acknowledges one of them. The first side is familiar. It is the scarcity belief, the deep, structural sense that money is limited, that there is not enough for everyone, that wanting more than a certain amount is dangerous or presumptuous or simply not realistic for someone like you. This shows up as the inability to ask for raises, as the habit of undercharging for your work, as the automatic deflation of your own worth in negotiation, as the anxiety that arises when money is coming in, well, as if the good period itself is a warning that something bad is coming to restore the balance. Most people who have done any work in this area recognize themselves in this description. The scarcity belief is well documented and widely discussed, but it is only half of the picture. The second side of the money complex is less talked about, and it is, in many cases, even more powerful in its sabotage. It is the fear of financial success. This sounds paradoxical. Why would anyone be afraid of the thing they are working toward? But Jung would say, because money, when it arrives in amounts that exceed what the unconscious considers appropriate, threatens something the unconscious values more than financial comfort. It threatens the group you belong to. Human beings are profoundly social animals. The unconscious knows this, even when the conscious mind is focused entirely on individual goals. And success, financial success in particular, has a way of changing your relationship with the people you came from. If you grow significantly wealthier than your family of origin, you become, in some ways, a different kind of person. Someone who has different problems, different options, different conversations. Someone who has crossed a line that other members of your group have not crossed. The unconscious registers this as danger, not as excitement, as the threat of separation from the group that formed you and from the identity that the group gave you. And it will, without announcing what it is doing or why, introduce mechanisms to prevent that separation, to keep you at a level of success that does not threaten your belonging. This is why certain people are extraordinarily talented, work extremely hard, come close to genuinely significant financial success, and then find some way, always a different way, always with a different explanation, to pull back to familiar ground at the last moment. It is not self-sabotage in the simple sense of being their own worst enemy. It is the unconscious doing exactly what it was built to do, protecting the social identity it has been organized around. Understanding this does not fix it immediately, but naming it is the beginning of the work. Because once you can see the mechanism, you can begin to bring conscious attention to the moments when it activates, to the moment when an opportunity seems to close before you have fully pursued it, to the moment when you undercut a negotiation you were in a position to win, to the moment when you hesitate at exactly the threshold where things were about to change significantly, and find a reason, a perfectly reasonable sounding reason, to step back. Jung would want you to sit with those moments, not to judge them, to investigate them, to ask what is actually happening below the surface of the apparently rational explanation. Let us talk about one more dimension of this that connects the personal psychology to something larger. Because Jung was always interested in the individual as part of a broader human story. And the psychology of money is not only a personal matter. It is a cultural one. The Western world has a specific and deeply embedded relationship with money that shapes the unconscious of nearly everyone born into it, regardless of their personal family history. The belief that financial value equals personal value, that your worth as a human being is measurable in your economic productivity, that to not be financially successful is to have failed in some fundamental way, that abundance is a reward for the right effort and the right attitude, which means that poverty is, implicitly, a failure of both. These cultural beliefs are even harder to see than personal family beliefs, because they are so pervasive that they feel like simply the way things are, rather than beliefs that could be examined and questioned. But Jung would insist on examining them, because the cultural unconscious, as he called, the shared psychological inheritance of a civilization, shapes the individual unconscious just as powerfully as the family of origin, and often far more invisibly. The person who has done extensive work on their personal money complex, but has not examined the cultural layer, is working in incomplete territory. They may have genuinely shifted the family narratives about scarcity and worthiness, and still find themselves trapped by the cultural equation that says a person's value is their productivity, still find themselves unable to rest, unable to receive, unable to allow periods of financial ease without filling them with activity, because the cultural unconscious is still running the deeper program that says stillness is laziness, and laziness is failure, and failure is the worst thing you can be. Jung thought this cultural dimension was one of the defining psychological challenges of the modern era, that the West had collectively organized itself around the ego's values, around achievement and production and accumulation, in a way that left the soul systematically unfed, and that the financial anxiety that pervades modern life, even in periods of genuine economic prosperity, was partly the symptom of that collective starvation. Now, here is where Jung's framework moves from diagnosis to direction. Because once you understand that the ceiling on your financial life is set primarily by the unconscious, the question becomes, what does the unconscious respond to? What actually reaches the level where the money complex lives and works with it, rather than just around it? The first answer is genuine encounter. The money complex, like any complex, loses some of its power when it is brought into conscious awareness. When you can see it, name it, trace it back to where it was installed, and recognize it operating in your present-day behavior, it no longer runs entirely on autopilot. It is still there, but you have a different relationship with it. The relationship of someone who sees the mechanism rather than someone who is simply being moved by it without understanding why. The second answer is what Jung called vocation. And this concept is perhaps the most practically transformative thing he had to say about success and financial life. Vocation, in the Jungian sense, is not the same as a career or a job or even a passion in the popular sense. It is something more specific and more demanding. It is the work, the contribution, the form of engagement with the world that emerges from the deepest layer of who you actually are. The work that the self, that deepest center of the psyche, is oriented toward. Jung believed there was a fundamental difference between what he would call work of the ego and work of the self. Work of the ego is chosen because it fits the persona, the social mask, the identity constructed to function effectively in the world. It may be skilled and well-compensated work, but it requires continuous effort to maintain, because it is fueled only by the ego's desire to achieve and be recognized. Work of the self is different. It is work that the person would do even if nobody was watching, even if the recognition was absent, even if the path was unclear. The engagement itself carries a quality of aliveness that nothing else does. The quality of being exactly where you are supposed to be, doing exactly what you are built for, even in the moments when it is difficult. And what Jung observed about this kind of work, it generates a quality of genuine investment and care for the work itself that other people notice, that the world responds to, that opens doors that the ego-driven approach, for all its effort, keeps finding closed. Not because the universe rewards virtue, but because the quality of presence that genuine vocational alignment produces is unmistakable and rare. It shows in the work. It shows in the conversation. The referrals, the repeat relationships, the opportunities that come from genuine reputation respond to that quality in a way that managed performance never quite achieves. There is one more thing Jung would say about the relationship between inner work and outer financial results that deserves to be named directly. He would say, the work changes you first, and then the outer circumstances follow the changed person. This means the person in the middle of doing the real inner work on their money complex may not see immediate outer changes. They may even, temporarily, see things get more uncertain before they get more stable, as old patterns that were keeping a certain kind of false stability in place begin to shift. This is the period where most people conclude the work is not working and go back to looking for a technique that produces faster results. Jung would say, stay. This is the period between the old structure loosening and the new structure becoming visible. The seed does not show anything above ground for a long time. That does not mean nothing is happening. It means the essential work is happening in the place where you cannot see it yet. What you can trust in that period is the quality of the engagement itself. Whether you are more genuinely present in your work than you used to be. Whether the decisions you are making feel more truly yours, less driven by fear, less distorted by the old complex. Whether the financial choices you are making are coming from a different place. These internal changes are the actual measure of progress. The outer results are their consequence, and the consequence comes. It is simply slower and less linear than any manifestation teacher will promise you. Let us make this concrete. The practical starting point is inventory, not of your finances, of your beliefs. What did the adults in your life say about money? What was the emotional atmosphere in your family around financial topics? Was money discussed openly or in hushed tones, as if it were something shameful or dangerous? Was wealth something to be admired or resented in others? Were people who had significantly more than your family described as lucky or corrupt, or simply as belonging to a different world that was not yours? What were the implicit rules that you had to work extremely hard for? Any money, and still it might not be enough? That wanting more than a certain amount was greedy? That security was the goal, not growth? Because the only thing worse than not having enough was getting more than you could sustain and then losing it? None of these beliefs are your fault. They were absorbed, not chosen. But they are running. And seeing them, naming them, and recognizing them in the specific patterns of your current financial behavior is the beginning of working with them rather than simply being driven by them. The next step is to look for the places where these beliefs are most active in your present life. The moment of hesitation before asking for your worth. The pattern of taking on undervalued work because declining it felt too risky. The subtle deflation that happens when things are going particularly well, as if you are bringing yourself back to a level that feels more familiar and therefore safer. These moments are not failures. In the Jungian framework, they are data, the most precise data available about what the unconscious believes about your financial life. And data can be worked with. And as that work happens, as the complex is gradually seen and named and integrated, something else happens too. The quality of your engagement changes. The perception changes. The person who was previously effectively blind to certain opportunities begins to see them. The relationships that were being kept at a managed distance begin to deepen into something more genuinely productive. The work that was being performed from behind the complex begins to be done from a more genuine place. And genuine work, done by a person who is genuinely present in it, produces results that the complex was always preventing. That is the flow Jung would point toward. Not money raining from the sky. A person genuinely changed at the level that matters, moving through a world that was always full of possibility, finally clear-eyed enough to see it, and capable enough to act on it. Before this ends, I want to ask you something I genuinely want to read in the comments. What is the narrative about money that you grew up with, not what you consciously believe now? What was the atmosphere? What were the messages? What did you absorb about wealth and worthiness? And what was financially possible for someone like you? Because naming it, even just in a comment, is the beginning of seeing it clearly. And seeing it clearly is where the real work starts. If this landed for you, if it named something you have been circling around without quite having the language for it, I hope you will subscribe to this channel. What we explore here is genuine psychology, Carl Jung's actual framework, applied to the real questions of how people live and what actually changes things. There is much more coming. And for those of you who feel something more personal in all of this, not just intellectual curiosity, but a genuine desire to reconnect with who you are at the deepest level, to find more peace, more purpose, and a more honest relationship with what you are capable of, I want you to know about an ebook we created called Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence. It was made for people who are genuinely seeking more than techniques, more peace, more purpose, and a deeper connection with God and with the sacred beyond the noise of daily life. You will find it pinned in the first comment below this video. Carl Jung understood that the relationship between a person's inner life and their outer circumstances is real and precise. That what is unexamined in the psyche does not stay safely contained in the psyche. It expresses itself in every choice, every relationship, every financial decision, every opportunity pursued, and every opportunity missed. The money will flow, not because you matched a frequency, because you finally looked at what was damming it up, and then you did something about it. That is the work. And unlike most of what is sold under the heading of manifesting wealth, it actually works.